let's talk about the Canadian dream. Many in this part of the world, and especially in Punjab, dream that dream. A house in the scenic Vancouver Island, clean roads, great healthcare facilities, even greater work-life balance, weekends at Niagara, Christmas in Toronto, and a fancy lifestyle. Like I said, dreamy. Over 130,000 Indians take a step towards this dream every year. They get their PR or permanent residency. But this is a cumbersome process, also competitive. Not everyone makes the cut. So many take an alternate route to Canada, especially if they are young. They enroll themselves into colleges in the country with the hope to land a job once their course ends and ultimately secure permanent residency. Many make it, but the others come back to tell horror stories. What kind of horror stories, you ask? Well, in February 2022, thousands of Indian students were left in the dark after 3 colleges they enrolled in simply closed down. These colleges had gone bankrupt. The Indian High Commission then had to put out this statement. Students from India planning higher studies in Canada are once again advised to make thorough checks of the credentials and standings of the institutions where they are seeking admission before making any payments in such institutions. But isn't this the protocol that students follow any which way? Read up on the institution, do every possible research, find out where you are enrolling to, talk to alumni, faculty, things like that. Well, actually, it turns out not really. For many students, the desperation to go to Canada is such that they want a seat in a college. And it doesn't matter what the college is. It doesn't matter what the course is. They may not have even heard about the college. Many approach colleges through local agents. Some agents are, well, how do I put it? Scam artists. They are scamsters. They are running a racket out there. They will ask you to pay thousands of dollars in exchange for a guaranteed seat. But they may disappear once the money is credited into their account. Or they may offer you a seat for an inflated price. Parents here in India sell their land, they mortgage their property, they do anything they can to get their kids to Canada, and they end up paying that fee. But in exchange for what? Degrees that don't count, degrees that don't help in getting a job. Many Indian students who end up going to Canada struggle to make ends meet. They cannot pay for a decent meal. They suddenly discover that the living expenses are way more than what they had bargained for. We hear horror stories of students getting into drugs, getting into criminal activities, even prostitution. And you know what? This horror story has no clear villain. Because whom do you blame? The students for not doing the basic background checks, the parents for just wanting to do the best for their children, the agents for abusing the vulnerability. Do you blame the families who end up helping all of these? They end up selling everything they have at stake, putting everything on the line just so that their children can live their Canadian dream. Some 753,000 international students will be joining colleges all across Canada this year. Many of them will be Indian students. Now let's remember, many Canadian institutions are fantastic. Universities like the University of Toronto, the University of British Columbia, McGill, these are top universities. They are among the best in the world. If your kids are lucky enough to get into them, you should be really happy. The concern are not these colleges or these universities. The concern are many universities or colleges or institutions, many of which are not even registered, which just sound really attractive, but actually could just get the kids into a lot of trouble. Now, the Indian High Commission in Canada is on alert. On the 6th of January, it put out this notice. The link allows students to verify that the college they are joining is legit. Now, to talk about this issue and the overall question of relations with Canada, I'm now joined by India's High Commissioner to Canada, Mr. Sanjay Kumar Verma. Thank you so much for joining us, High Commissioner Verma. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. And there's a lot we want to talk to you about, especially concerns about Indian students heading to Canada and those of them who are going to institutions that may be somewhat dodgy or through agents who are definitely dodgy. But before I get to that question, we have you on the line, so I'm going to talk to you about some of the broader questions of ties with Canada. And I think this year, as India is the president of G20, we will no doubt be looking to Canada to help us with many of the things that have to be done at G20. Is that one of your priority areas?
Thank you very much. Canada provides also a link between the G20 and G7, one of the G7 countries as well. And we had traditional relations with Canada. We share the values. When I look at the priorities of G20, our presidency's priority at G20, all the 6 broad areas of priorities, which have been listed by our presidency, have got overlap in Canada, both bilaterally as well as multilaterally. So just to recapitulate for the viewers as to what are these broad areas: green development, climate finance, life, which Prime Minister Modi launched in Kevadia, accelerated, inclusive and resilient growth, accelerated progress on SDGs with special reference to health and education, technological transfer and digital public infrastructure, multilateral institutions for the 21st century, and 3 Fs, which are food, fuel, and fertilizer, and of course, women-led development. So if I look at all of them are in conversation bilaterally with India. And on climate change and green development, Canada is a big lead in the world. And India is also doing a lot with its own commitments as a developing country to reach a carbon neutral world. And what we have done, which not many countries have, is that we have put in technology and data to ride over the philosophy of climate change and green development, where I see a lot of convergence between India and Canada.
Now, I know that India's often had some areas of concern in Canada, Khalistani elements, for example, the sort of prominence that they sometimes get, some of the activities they do here in India, issues like that. How are you managing some of those possible areas where you would perhaps like the Canadians to do a lot more?
You know, I have inherited an institution which is very functional, and therefore the continuity is the name of the game. There would be changes, but largely it will be continuity as far as I'm concerned. And we get our clues from our political leadership in India as well as to where to take the relationship. And what I feel is that the political leadership is extremely encouraged to see some recent developments in Canada. And the mandate that I have come with is to take this relationship notches above.
All right, High Commissioner Kumar, I just want to turn now to a really important issue that we wanted to discuss with you about. And I know that the Indian High Commission in Canada has been really concerned about this for a while. A lot of the people who are arriving in Canada are students. Now, many of them are students who will be going to reputable organizations, you know, the McGills and the University of Toronto's and the UBCs, for example. But a large number of the students will be coming there chasing the Canadian dream, hoping to get their PRs and hoping to get their residency or their citizenship, and they will be ending up in dodgy institutions. Many of them will be taken over by scamsters, either in India or in Canada. Many of them have parents who will have gone into debt to send them out there. And then they suddenly arrive in Canada. They find that the colleges do not exist, or even if the colleges do exist, you can't necessarily get a job as a result of that. They've been taken for a ride. And then that's a crisis, and that's a crisis that I'm sure you are deeply concerned about also.
Thank you very much for asking this question. This is our main concern. Those students who are going to the premier institutions here, we have hardly any concern because they are very, very well looked after. There's a tradition of international students going there. There are bodies of Indian students there who can help them internally as well. But those who are coming here to chase, as you said, the Canada dream and going anywhere they can get admission at, that is the most vulnerable segment of our students coming in here. So what I would say to their parents, to the students through you, through your viewership, is that please do your research. Please be aware that like any other country, Canada also has excellent educational facilities and institutions, but it also has very, very few those undesirable colleges which have been cropping up in the entire geography of Canada. Be aware of them, because I know most of the parents, when they send their kids to Canada, they would have taken a debt. They would have sold their houses and and livestock and farms, etc. So they have to be aware of where they are going to. Then what happens is that many of these kids came here unaware of what is waiting ahead of them. Once they land up here, their unmet expectations lead them to meeting some not so desirable people. And then since they are impressionable minds, so therefore they get into this and they get influenced by those people. By getting influenced, I'm not only talking about from the philosophical point of view, from the ideological point of view, but also from the illegal practices point of view. Many of these students get into doing things which are illegal in Canada and also illegal according to the universal rights a citizen of the world should. So to give you an example, many of these students go to unpaid work. Many of these students, unfortunately, and some Indian students were also involved, get into some other sins.
Absolutely, sir. And we've heard about drugs. We've heard about prostitution in some cases. There's clearly crime and criminal gangs that they can get. If someone lands up out there and they find that they're not getting a PR, they're not getting residency, they may not get citizenship, the institution to which they have arrived out there after their parents have sold everything is a dodgy institution, then the kids can get involved in criminal activities. And I'm not even talking about now falling into the clutches of Khalistani organizations. So those are things, and I'm sure there's a message that you would want to be sending people here as well in India. Be careful. Parents, be careful. Do your diligence.
Absolutely. And, once they are caught doing something which is illegal according to the Canadian law, their Canadian dream will be shattered. So it works both ways. One, that when they are chasing their Canadian dream, they are doing things they should not be doing. But once they have done it and that come to the notice of the law and order community here, then their Canadian dream will be shattered because they will be deported and sent back home.
Absolutely, or worse, they could find themselves in prison. So one of the things that we keep on hearing about is, and one of the reasons why there's $8 billion being contributed to the Canadian economy just on this, many of the kids who are coming across there to Canada think that they are guaranteed a job once they've arrived there. They're guaranteed permanent residency. They're guaranteed immigration. But of course, as you know, going there and doing a course, that does not necessarily follow. Okay, it may be easier in Canada than it is in Europe or the United States, but it's not guaranteed that if you end up there and hundreds and thousands of students land up there, it's not that you're guaranteed any sort of a job there.
Absolutely, it is not guaranteed at all, because there's a process to follow. There are exams to clear. And only on that basis, one is able to gain permanent residency in Canada. In order to meet those expectations, one will have to prepare oneself. Pathway of permanent residency in Canada is more favorable as compared to many other geographies. Many of Indians then finally go for Canadian nationality as well, becoming a part of the Indo-Canadian community. So there is a pathway, there is a well-defined pathway, but there are requirements to lead to the success of that pathway, and that has to be kept in mind. My request through your channel to your viewership is that please spread the news that no parent should send their children to Canada without doing due diligence, without scrutinizing what is in the offer. And to my surprise, many of these dreams are sold by our own fellow Indians in their villages and cities, who are basically call themselves as recruiters and get commission from these so-called colleges.
All right, thank you, sir. It was lovely talking to you. Now, by the way, anybody watching this, if you or someone you know has been scammed by an agent or has a horror story to tell from his or her college experience in Canada, do get in touch with us and share your story. It's also important to note that everything which we have just said about Canada is not restricted to Canada. Similar problems do happen elsewhere as well. People get scammed and taken to Germany or other parts of Europe or the UK or the USA. But right now, because of that flood of immigration to Canada, I think that's one country you've got to be particularly careful about. And watch the scamsters who are operating in India as well, who could be coming and spinning a really nice story, but ending up dropping your child into a nightmare. Your stories, if you share them with us, will hopefully help prevent this from happening and save other innocent students from this nightmare.